So let's go to the people. Hello, gentlemen. Are you all well? Give us a wave. You can all hear us okay?
Morning, Alex.
Morning.
Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, all. So before I hand over to you guys and let you all introduce yourselves, as I said, the discussion that we're having here is called De-risking Your Data Migration. Just a couple of bits of logistics. The usual things apply. Please feel free, anybody who's watching this live, to type in any questions you have into the panel, and I will endeavour to integrate those into the discussion as we go through it. But I suppose really as a bit of a preamble, the whole concept of data, or the reality of data, is a big topic now. I run the Cloud Industry Forum. You know, we're an IT trade body. One of the things we do is look at research for adoption rates and trends and what's happening in the market, and indeed inhibitors. And one of the inhibitors we see in the market, the top one actually is security, but the other one that we see certainly in there is data migration issues and the challenge of legacy and everything associated with that. And I think we'll delve into some of this discussion as we go through, picking the brains of the three gentlemen we got here. You know, data has been described as the oil or the gold or whatever mineral you want to choose in there, in regards to the vitality and the importance that it has within businesses. The size and the scale, the growth of data repositories, data lakes is becoming huge, and that creates a challenge for many organizations. I guess also it creates an opportunity, and that's really kind of what I want to try and delve into on this journey. So let me ask each of you to introduce yourselves, if you would. Maybe if we go anti-clockwise, Adrian, James, and then Chris. Tell us who you are, where you're from, a little bit about yourselves. Adrian.
Good morning, everyone.
Well, we got as far as good morning from Adrian, and then that was it. Adrian,
I'll jump in, shall I?
Please do, James. Yeah.
I'm James McCarthy. I'm the CMO at Exonar. We're a data discovery business. We help our customers, large enterprises, deal with exactly the kind of data quantities you're talking about, Alex. Get an understanding of what they've got, where it is, who has access to it, and then go about using that to either protect their business and reduce risk by finding sensitive data, or extract value, corporate knowledge from that data so that they can grow and compete.
Superb. Thanks, James, and welcome. Chris, hi, how are you?
Hi, yeah, good, thank you. Right, I'm Chris Sanders. I'm IT Director at the XPS Pensions Group, and we look after pension schemes in terms of actuarial valuations and administration for hundreds of thousands of members of corporate pension schemes across the UK. We've been through a rapid period of growth over the last 5 or 6 years, and we're currently executing our cloud-first strategy, and data is a massive part of that for us.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, we'll delve into some of your challenges, Chris, as we go through this. Hopefully, Adrian will be able to dial back in. That's I think the shortest intro I've ever heard from anybody doing one of these discussions. I'm sure he'll dial back in as he reboots his PC router, whatever. But let's crack on. I mean, what I should say, just to introduce Adrian, who will be back, and here he comes now, is he's the technical director at Softwerx. Oh, hello, Adrian. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for the internet provider deciding to accidentally reboot the router.
No worries. Your timing is perfect. You're just now the last to introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and where you're from.
I'm Adrian, Technical Director at Softwerx. I've been working in IT for the last 25 years in security and compliance. From the dodgy accent, you can probably tell I'm originally from South Africa, but been in the UK for the last 20-odd years. What's quite unique from our point of view, although we're an IT security provider, I'm also the group Director, CTO for the ClearSprings Group, which provides services to the Home Office, which means that security is obviously very important, and so is data.
Absolutely. So is the ISP provision.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
It's a problem when you live in the countryside.
Yeah, tell me about it. Absolutely. All right. So let's try and put some color around this, I guess, initially, just to get a bit of an understanding around, you know, the data that we're talking about here in the migration stuff. James, I'll maybe ask you to jump in first. Why, James, do you believe is data migration an issue, and why should it be a priority for businesses?
Really, Alex, you've talked about the volume and scale and the diversity of data that's grown over the last few years, and it's petabytes of information, and it's gathered through all different formats in different spaces and different technologies that have been deployed in organizations very, very quickly. It's been a bit of a revolution, hasn't it, the IT industry over the last 20 so years, and what comes with all the tech is the data that's associated with it. And companies have just stockpiled it, really. They've gathered the data, they've stored it, they've done their best to protect it, look after it. But from time to time, you need to start moving that data around. And whether that's digital transformation or whether it's some form of migration from an old system to a new system within your data estate, or whether it's mergers and acquisitions. We work with customers who have all sorts of reasons where one day comes where you have to actually start moving it, lifting and shifting it, and taking dark legacy data that could contain anything and start doing something with it.
Thanks, James. So just, James, sticking with you for a second, has the period of the pandemic over the last year or so changed the data landscape, do you think?
It has. Obviously, there's been huge amounts of talk about it. I think it has. It's changed, obviously, working patterns for lots of people. Organizations have deployed much more quickly, particularly remote technologies than ever before. And so that has forced some migrations of data. It's forced some IT reconfigurations within organizations. And no doubt that has accelerated things as well. But I think this was a problem, a challenge that existed before COVID and continues. And it's amazing because you would have thought that everyone's migrated to the cloud by now and they've done these migrations, but actually we're finding just as many people talking about it now, post-COVID, during COVID, as there were 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll come back, I think, to some of those points as we go through this discussion. Chris, from your point of view, it'd be great to hear some of your, you're an end user, a customer, we call you, I believe. It'd be great to hear some of your data challenges and migration issues that you may have faced as a business. Is it a priority for your business?
We're on over the last 3 or 4 years, been on a rapid M&A based growth. So yes, taking data from one infrastructure of a business that we're providing, or part of the business we're carving out and moving it into ours, is one of our biggest challenges. And actually, when you're carving out a business that you're buying part of, the timescales that drive that migration can limit the quality of the migration.
Yeah. Okay. Adrian, from your point of view, how did Softwerx play in this data migration space? Tell us a little bit about this, and maybe any client experiences you've got as well.
Yes, I think the big challenge for customers at the moment is how they are working on migrating the data. And what we are finding is, you mentioned the pandemic, it sort of has accelerated some of the digital transformation, cloud adoption strategies of organizations. As somebody said to me the other day, what drove our digital transformation project? The pandemic. That was actually have accelerated the process that we have to think about how we're going to work. We don't know how long it is. But what we are finding with the data migration is the challenges that organizations have is we've got all of this data, and we can talk about legacy data, we can talk about current data, but we have all of this information that we want to try and consolidate, take into the cloud, but more importantly, how we're going to utilize it. And what we are finding is it's almost we're detecting with organization paralysis, because they don't know where to start, they don't know where to tackle it, they don't know what the end game's got to look like. And that's where we spending a lot of our time, is holding the organization's hands, trying them to understand, hold on, what do you have? Do you really need everything that you've got? And how do we move it forward? And as we said, a lot of organizations are in the cloud, but you'll find that it's actually quite a small percentage of their data that has migrated to the cloud. It's normally email these days. That's normally the first step that most organizations do. But even beyond that, it is a little bit of how do we deal with that data? And that's an ongoing conversation. And it's just working with customers and help guiding them through the process. Because as I say, when you first look at it, it looks like such a daunting task. We don't know where to start. We might just stay where we are until we're forced to take some action.
So, Adrian, I'm interested in this. So, can you put a little bit of definition, if you like, around? Forgive me, I'm somewhat non-technical, so I'm approaching this from a business perspective, just trying to understand it. What do we mean by data? I mean, because you've referenced, Office 365 there, but actually, I think James was talking about petabytes of data, vast data lakes, and so on. Is that really what? Are we just dealing in the large enterprise end when we talk about data, or does it roll down?
It rolls down to the smallest organization, and I'll give you an example where we've got customers with this customer, small customers, a big design company from their point of view, but they have to keep data for 20 years. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know where to put it. They just keep it available, and they literally saying, we're just buying more and more disk storage because we don't know what to do with the data. We don't know how to find it. We actually printing certain emails manually to make sure we keep it from a point of view and filing it. So it's all of this paralysis a little bit about data and massive storage of data. So it is not just big organizations, it's any size organization. The challenge might be resolved a little bit quicker the smaller you are, because you can be a bit more agile. But from an organization's point of view, everybody's got something like HR, Sage, database, some customer systems, and for them, there isn't a quick answer really, and it is helping them, guide them. So the problem exists no matter where you are. The bigger you are, obviously, the more complex it is, but it's the same challenges. And what has changed as well is the regulatory landscape, is the whole risk of cybersecurity. So suddenly you've got to demonstrate compliance. You've got to demonstrate that you know what data you have, what information you hold, why do you hold it? And that has been quite a challenge. And also we found is quite a sea change for mentality and how people work. And what has changed is our conversations with the board, the directors, that actually goes, well, we want to know that we are secure. We want to know that our data, what information we hold and why we hold it. And we want to make sure that if we do get compromised, we're not going to get in trouble. Well, guess what? You suddenly have to start addressing the elephant in the room, which is the data that we have for the last 20 years that we don't know why we even have it anymore.
Yeah, interesting. James, from your point of view, I mean, we've got obviously, privacy issues. We've got the GDPR, the GDPR discussion. There's all kinds of issues and challenges, regulatory challenges, depending on the industry you're in, that businesses have to adhere to and follow. What do you think represents the biggest risk, James, is really where I'm trying to go with this one, as far as any data migration project is concerned?
It really depends. So what people have done traditionally, and I know Adrian will talk about this, is they've employed a kind of a lift and shift strategy when it comes to a migration. So that data that we talked about that everyone's happy to leave in the background as legacy data is kind of safe when you leave it in the background, because actually if you can't find it and work out what's in there, then there's a good chance that nothing from that is going to particularly end up in the wrong place, because it's sort of hidden. As soon as you're talking about moving things across the organization, a couple of important things happen. The first thing is there's a risk that you're going to take the sensitive information that was dark and hidden, and you're going to inadvertently put that on the top of the pile in the destination environment. So if you're moving it all into Azure, for example, you're moving it into somewhere else as part of a some kind of migration where employees could suddenly find they have access to sensitive information that was hidden before. So that's the first thing, is unearthing previously hidden information. The other thing is that if from a regulatory point of view, obviously there's a lot of GDPR focus, for example, on compliance originally, and now that's moving to accountability. If you were to suffer some kind of incident, or you were to be audited, which is happening increasingly in the customers that we talk to, and it's found that you've recently moved data and you weren't aware of what was in that data when you moved it, that is seen to be a problem in terms of your accountability for that data. So in a way, the regulators will say, well, while it's dark and while it's in the background, we can kind of understand that you struggle to understand what's in there, but you've just moved all that information. Surely you found that and you took the effort to de-risk that information while you were migrating it, didn't you? And so I think that's the big problem, is it increases risk literally if you uncover data, but it also increases your accountability or your perceived accountability for that data by touching it.
So, James, is a cloud-based data migration the answer?
When you say a cloud-based data migration, do you mean migrating data to the cloud?
Yes.
I don't think that. I mean, Adrian will have a view, I guess, as well, and Chris. But I don't think the whether it's cloud or on-prem or whatever actually matters too much. It's the fact that when you're in the process of moving data, the regulators are increasingly saying that you need to go and audit and understand that. And now is the time, as it were, while you're doing that, whatever the destination is, whatever the origin is, it increases your need to be accountable for what you're doing. I don't personally believe that whether it's to the cloud, in the cloud, quite where that data is being stored doesn't really come into it. It's more that if you're going to move it and look after it, you've got to then de-risk it as well.
Yeah, Chris, you were shaking your head there. I know you.
Well, no, I think I don't actually think that where it is the answer, but I think that if you move it to infrastructure as a service or software as a service, so a provider, you've got an on-premise application and you're moving it to the provider's software as a service offering. That the strength of your governance around that changes, the emphasis of that changes, because you know what your own controls are. But if you move it to a software as a service provider, your emphasis is understanding what their controls are and what their up and downstream controls are as well.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. Yeah, that's absolutely valid. And actually, the other thing is around control in general, because control of data, control of access to data. As soon as you move its location, obviously, the entire access control framework changes completely, which I think is to Chris's point as well. So needs to be carefully looked at.
Okay, thanks. Chris, can you tell us any more about any of the migration challenges that you've had, or indeed, what you're running within your organization, appreciating there may be confidentiality there?
Yeah, so we're pretty much following the path that Adrian sort of set out earlier. We've gone to Microsoft 365 for SharePoint and for email. We're using DR as a service, so cloud-based service, and we're using lots of software as a service vendors to combine infrastructure and application, so we get that bundled service, which gives us from my view, gives us a much better service, rather than just sticking it in a public cloud offering where we still have to manage the infrastructure ourselves. In terms of challenges, that they're manifold. Actually, I alluded earlier to some time pressures. So we took on a large business 2 or 3 years ago, which doubled our business size, and we had a transitional service agreement of 2 years, but we were migrating upwards of 150 terabytes of data of different sorts, and that's a long time to do discovery. Sorry, not a very long time to discover all of that data and migrate it. So we ended up going back to what James says. We were just picking it up, moving it, and putting it in our environment, and making sure at that point that all our security was right and the access levels were right. So our time, where we're controlling it ourselves, where we're saying, okay, we've got to do an upgrade, or we're moving it to a software as a service solution, we're in control of that migration. But where it's an M&A, there's some time pressures based on a transitional service agreement, which might have been agreed without your knowledge, and only gives you 18 months to migrate all this data. And that was the biggest challenge, I would say, that we've faced.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Adrian, from your point of view, we've touched on legacy. James, I know you've got views around this one, which we'll come to in a second as well. I'd said right in my sort of preamble at the start that legacy. I think legacy is seen as a dirty word often. It's all it's all legacy system terrible. We've got to get off those. Got to get cloud based. Do you agree with that, Adrian? Is that a challenge? Where do you sit on this?
Legacy is a challenge for organizations, because guess what? That data has still got value to the business. It's still important to the business. You can't just get rid of it. You can't just forget about it. And what we are finding is that getting that balance right between migrating data keeping the data and for what business reasons we getting the data, and also then the regulatory compliance around that, which I touched on earlier. And a good example would be if we even go back to legacy systems. If you look at, I mean, you can just look at some of the banks that's been on the BBC in the last few years. Every time they do a system upgrade, there's major fallout, major chaos where they're trying to modernize the system. So it is very risky when you need to start touching these systems. And I think, as Chris just said, mergers, acquisitions, you have all of these systems, and some of them might be old, some of them might not be supported, and you have new data and you have to bring them all together. And it's a constant challenge from an organization. And I think with the data that you have, it's not just getting rid of the legacy systems. That's what they call it is, but it's making sure, are we duplicating that data? How do we merge those databases together from a point of view? So legacy is not necessarily a bad word. What I normally say to organizations is, do we have a business reason to retain the data? What is the commercial value of that data? What is the value to the organization, and how does that help improve our business? And sometimes it is literally just we're keeping it because we might get a lawsuit. Well, then fine. Do we really need to migrate it? Can we isolate it? Can we put it somewhere else? Can we keep that system separately? Do we really need that information? Because what we have found as well, a lot of the organizations, they've done this merger, they've done the acquisition, but they're still keeping the old databases in case they missed anything, or in case they made a mistake with their data and they want to retain it. But that's fine. Retain that information, but make sure you retain it in a dark vault, for example, or keep it completely isolated. But what we find is that challenge of people don't wanting to delete anything, not wanting to descale the amount of data that they have. And that's probably the big challenge that I'm seeing. So no, legacy is not bad. We all have it, let's be honest. Everybody's got some old data that they're not 100% sure is. It's just finding a strategy to say, do we anonymize it? Do we keep it? Do we delete it? Do we migrate it, but migrate it into a different format, for example?
So interesting. Okay, so Adrian, so the cynic in the room, Adrian, might go, as a technology provider, you would be wanting everybody to get current, stay current, and always on the latest versions of whatever it might be. That sounds like that might not be the case then, from your point of view.
No, it is. It's great to be. So depending on your requirements, you need to be on the latest security update. That is the big challenge that we're always seeing, is to comply with regulations. You need to make sure the security is in place. But running the latest systems, there is no. It's great. Yes, obviously you'll be more secure, or it will be good to be on the latest systems. But we've got customers running really old technology because the cost of upgrading that technology is just prohibitive versus the benefit that they'll see to migrate it. So it is finding practical business solutions and let the business drive what we got to do, and regulation help us drive what we need to do with our systems as well in some cases. Because if you want to give some examples, you still have systems out there like Windows 7. It's a bit like the NHS. They're still running on Windows 7, or some of the old electrical organizations. Just saw a court case where they're trying to compel somebody to support their old legacy systems because they haven't invested to upgrade it. Well, sorry, it's end of life. We can't help you any longer. And it's then you got to decide as an organization what you want to do with that. But as long as the security is in place, there isn't a let's put you on the nicest, newest, shiniest toy that's out there, for example. We do not operate like that. It's how is it going to benefit the business? And that's a big challenge that we're seeing is sometimes communicating that benefit to the business, where then there's a bit of a reluctance to embark on the projects we found. And I don't know, Chris, what your thoughts are on that, for example, if you've seen that in your organization.
Yeah, look, we're fortunate in we don't have massive legacy, but the issue is right. I mean, it would be nice for us as IT managers to have latest equipment, because our management overhead of latest systems is so much less. But actually, if we've got legacy that adds value to the business, and and the risk of moving it is great, then why would we do it until it becomes a real imperative?
Yeah. Okay. James, I know you had some strong views around legacy. Do you want to give us your thoughts on the issues of legacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key things is why would you migrate data if it wasn't valuable? So, it's sort of like the opposite of looking at redundant data or obsolete data or whatever that you don't need to retain. The other way of looking at it is that data quite often has a good proportion of valuable stuff in it, and you either need to keep it for regulatory reasons, or it has genuine value to the business going forward, and it can contribute to growing the business in the future. So you only migrate data really given that it has value. So even in an M&A scenario, the only reason you would want to adopt the risk of somebody else's data having bought the company is if you felt that there was something in there that you either had to keep or you wanted to keep. So in a sense, data migration is driven by value. You've just got to make sure that you understand where the value is in that data before you migrate it, and how you make that thing as seamless and practical as possible. Chris mentioned earlier on the kind of the pressures of an M&A timescale, for example, where you've got 18 months to complete it, and you've got 6 petabytes of data that you've got to complete. The thing there is to make sure that you understand what data is valuable, because there must be valuable data in there. You understand all that stuff and organize it correctly, and you only migrate across and protect appropriately what you need, and then hopefully you can make some easy decisions on what you don't need to retain. And Adrian's also right about the fact that nobody wants to delete data. We have amazing conversations with our customers where they get so close to the delete button but never quite manage to press it, if you know what I mean. And that's a kind of a human instinct, I think, apart from anything else. So in that case, put it beyond use. But I think that the thing about migrations that's interesting is that you wouldn't do it if you didn't need to. And you need to because the data itself is intrinsically valuable, or at least some of it is.
Okay, some really interesting stuff in here. I think what we're looking at to a degree in the nature of the conversation that I've been steering feels like we're a little bit on the back foot as far as data is concerned. I think there's a going on the front foot piece as well, which is looking at the data opportunity and what that might represent to a business. And I think we can move on to that in a moment. I don't just mean AI because the big vendors are telling us AI is the way to go, but there's got to be other opportunities we're looking at there. Adrian, from your point of view, though, why wouldn't a business just plug in a data classification tool? Is that the answer?
Well, from a point of view, the data classification tool is there to help label information or help you understand the type of information. But for the data to be really valuable is to firstly understand what you have, how much of that is duplicate, how much of that exists in multiple locations. It's great going to go and label something if it's personal identifiable information, fine, great, we've labeled the information, so what? Is sometimes my reaction is great, you've de-risked it potentially from a breach. But if you talk about the mergers and acquisitions, for example, how many records are duplicate? How many records exist in all of these different sites that we've just bought? What information do we hold on a certain individual across multiple systems? From a point of view, there isn't a simple way to understand that. And before I actually go and classify that individual's record, for example, let me understand how many times they exist in how many locations. And what organizations has found is that data has been duplicated through their business quite regularly. And once you look at that scale of data, you'll find that a lot of data has not been touched, a lot of data has not really been accessed or needed, or it's been duplicated. So what we normally say to organizations is, you have this data, put it in a way that you can actually access it and extract value. And what we are finding now is organizations is understanding the data, deduping the data, bringing the records together, and then use that to monetize some of the areas that they want to do, and understand how we can get better value out of it. Is there different products we can market to our data? Because actually data is valuable if you can put it in a way where it can be accessed, analyzed, and leveraged. And I think just classifying data is great, but you are actually addressing such a small area. All you are trying to do there is just reduce risk. You're not actually extracting the value out of that data.
James, you're nodding. You look like you want to come in on that.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Adrian's absolutely right. The thing that we see with classification with our customers is that for certain types of data, it's really, really accurate and quick way of identifying PII, personally identifiable information, for example, credit card numbers, national insurance numbers, whatever it may be. For that kind of thing where the rules are easy to define, so does this document contain things that look like this with a high degree of accuracy, then classification is really effective at going and applying a label to that, and then you can go and pass that on to another system to do something with it. The problem is our customers find that there's actually a relatively small amount of information that they can accurately classify up front without looking at it properly. So we advocate more of a visibility view, where you understand your data, because the other thing we find with customers is that the data that they've got is very particular to their business. Some of it's default, as we talked about. PII is the same in every company, but our customers actually appreciate being able to get visibility of their data within their environment, within their industry, within their circumstances. So that M&A, for example, you've got essentially another company's data, and if you run classification through it, you get the PII and you can understand where that is, but you don't understand that data. And what we find is our customers want to understand the data that they've got, the duplicates, the redundant, obsolete stuff. But how do you know which data is redundant without really having visibility of it? How do you define a rule that says, I don't want to keep this kind of data, because if you haven't first had a really good idea of what that data was like? So I think classification has its role. Once you've understood your data and you can accurately define how to classify things, then classification tools are fantastic. Day in, day out, they're going to go and keep looking for new data that comes up of the same type and applying a policy. In legacy data, the first step has to be understanding what data you've got.
Right. Okay. And Chris, from your point of view as a business user, you agree with that in terms of that classification component?
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like a massively useful use case for everybody at any stage, even if it's just ongoing reprocessing of new data.
Yeah. And Chris, do you use your data within your business? Back to the point I was talking about earlier, is this kind of the data opportunity. We're talking a bit more migration here, but as far as data is concerned, do you look at it as saying, well, how can we now use this to help the business, to grow the business, etc.?
Yeah, and I don't think that, certainly within our business, the opportunity to monetize quality data doesn't really exist, just because of the way we sell consulting services and transactional admin services. But for us, perhaps the best use of fully tagged data is better analysis of the data, helping us and our clients to make better decisions.
Right. Okay. Adrian, I'd love to get any experiences that you've got of working with clients where data is now being used in a more proactive manner rather than a reactive manner, in terms of saying these are regulatory requirements that we have. Have you got any that you can kind of touch on there for us at all?
Yeah, so we've got a few of our customers, for example, that has brought lots of legacy databases, lots of legacy systems together. And what they have found is by combining that information, they are actually able to mine it now to understand behavior. And I think you mentioned on the AI is write algorithms to understand that this type of individual, for example, if they've bought A, B, and C, they most likely will buy product F from us as well, or service F. So we're seeing more of the organizations we're working with leveraging that information and being able to understand that data. The other bit that we are understanding as well is organizations that suddenly brought the data together and then realizing the type of contracts, the type of services that they are marketing, different areas of the business, although they're very closely related, are completely approaching the information separately. And by combining the information and giving them visibility of each other's areas, they've been able to market or sell services or improve services by spotting patterns in the data. So it's not just necessarily selling more. We've also had customers who's actually gone, by making a small change, we can reduce our cost and improve the perception and services we have. And what is done by getting all of these data, legacy data, making it more visible, making it easier to understand, it's giving them opportunity to spot patterns and leverage those patterns that spotted and helping their customers from a service point of view. So we're seeing a number of different cases, but that's a classic example of one where we worked with in financial services, which is brought it together and then worked out how they could offer more services to their customers.
Yeah, great example there. James, from your point of view, I mean, we all see this every day in our consumer lives, don't we? Whether you're an Amazon customer or some retail shopping online, which is all we've been able to do for the last year or so, and some pretty smart and sophisticated, marketing automation, data automation type of engines behind some of the bigger retailers that we see out there. Have you got any kind of customer scenarios or any scenarios like this, James, that you can tell us about?
Absolutely. One of them is kind of what Adrian's talking about in terms of behavioral stuff from a marketing perspective. Other ones include a single view of your customer across different silos. So, for example, in a retail banking environment, there's a good chance that you do personal banking, business banking, insurance, and have different products in different product lines. And traditionally, a lot of that data has been separated. So the ability to know whether John Smith that has a bank account with you also has insurance with you and also has a business banking account with you, that may then mean that they're a target customer for some other kinds of products that you want to go and sell them and bring together, is a really big one. So getting a single view of customers across an organization is a really important thing that organizations are looking to do. And we've seen that also in other financial services areas around debt collection, even, and debt books, matching people that owe money across different databases, etc. There's all sorts of scenarios. The final one I'd point to is in pharmaceuticals or R&D, the ability to go through previous research in the past that was undergone by different research teams. And some of the time that information is stored in unstructured format. So it's in documents, it's in presentations, it's even in email conversations sometimes. R&D decisions and data that was gathered during various phases of product development. So we see big opportunities for knowledge companies or companies that have a lot of intellectual property to go and mine that information for value, whether that be to defend a patent case or whether it be to go and understand how a decision was made to change a formula in a particular product 5 years ago, because it's amazing how that information tends to get lost in the dark data along with everything else.
Yeah, interesting. I mentioned AI, artificial intelligence, earlier, and was rather dismissive of it, which is probably a little unfair given that it's such a massive focus that we're seeing from certainly the hyperscale providers at the moment. Are you seeing a demand for that, James, in your space at the moment? Is it now a talking point that's becoming real?
Yeah, absolutely it is. So I'll go back to the previous point around visibility.
Yeah.
So if you can give systems true visibility of documents, for example, let's take a contract, whatever that contract may read, from a legacy contract, let's say, that contains information. If you wanted to go and understand that information at scale and you had thousands of contracts, even if you had visibility of that data, then an individual is going to have to go through one by one to those contracts and try and figure out what's valuable in it. So the application of AI in that scenario, of course, is to take the decisions that a human would make looking at that contract and understanding it and enabling a machine to be able to go and intelligently do that job for you. I talked about classification and the accuracy of the rules in classification. Simple PII, very simple, just match a pattern, match a regular expression. It's very easy. If you take that to a contract scenario, teaching a classification engine to understand a contract and understand what's in it, what might be risky, what might be commercially sensitive, what might be valuable, is obviously a job for machine learning and AI. So that's where we're seeing people do this at scale.
And I guess the logical extension of that, just thinking about this in terms of data and the scale of data happening now, James, is I'm thinking about IoT and Edge, which are massive repositories of data, particularly around Edge, that are going to be hitting organizations as well. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think the discussion we've had today around migration and legacy data is often unstructured information.
Yeah.
So it's often documents, emails, attachments to emails, etc., etc. So it's a little bit less easy to deal with. So if your Edge environment or your IoT environment is, broadly speaking, structured data, so it's in nice neat columns and tables, and it's very easily understandable, then you wouldn't necessarily look to migrate a lot of that at any given time. It's more where there's unstructured information that it becomes more challenging to do. I don't know whether Chris would agree with that. So we don't see so much in terms of structured information being a challenge, because people generally can understand how to make relational databases talk to each other. They do build their data lakes of structured data and then go and do analytics on that. In this world that we're talking about with legacy migration of data, it tends to be more unstructured. That's the challenge.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, relational database is very easy to analyze, but unstructured data on your file servers, on your email PSTs, or your mailboxes, yeah, that's not so easy at all.
Okay, Chris, just sticking with you for a second. The last 12 months, 2020, the first part of 21, have been a challenging year for reasons that we're all very familiar with. Are there any ways, Chris, in which a post-pandemic world is impacting your data strategy, or do you think it will?
I think we covered this a little earlier. Actually, it's not impacting the strategy per se, but it is impacting the speed at which that strategy is executed. We've been trying to support 1,300, nearly 1,400 people working from home, and that's been a real challenge when everyone's coming into our data center to get all of their stuff or a lot of their stuff. So our migration strategy to put more stuff into Azure and more stuff into software as a service providers makes that a lot easier to achieve when working remotely. Now, I think our own remote working strategy will be impacted by the pandemic as we give more and more people flexibility to work from home that they've enjoyed over the last year. So I think rather than changing the strategy, it's just accelerated it, and we'll get to the point that we hope to be a lot quicker. Yeah,
there was the now rather well known, I forget the exact detail of the timings around it, but Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, quoted that I think there'd been 2 years of digital transformation that had been done in a quarter, essentially. So the acceleration of activity that's gone on. I guess you've probably seen that in the reflection of Microsoft's share price as well, which is soaring somewhat at the moment. Adrian, from your point of view, data discovery we know is kind of opening new possibilities within organizations. Which prospects are the most exciting for yours, do you think? Where do you think this is going to go?
Well, I think from a point of view, there is just more data, and it's quite difficult to say because it will differ from each customer, if I'm very honest. But what I'm seeing is part of that education with the customers, the realization we suddenly have visibility of our data. We suddenly understand what we have. We actually never knew we owned that data. And what I'm seeing, what the exciting bit is, from my point of view, is seeing organization realizing the value of the information that they actually already own, and information that they had at their fingers that they just never knew. And what we are seeing is as you take them on the journey, it starts off as we need to migrate this legacy data to deal with some sort of compliance issue, for example, or legacy system. But it soon ends up actually this information that we've transformed has opened up our ability to get a better understanding. And what they are looking for more now is that transformation, whether that Chris touched on, is how can we change our working practices? How do we become more efficient? Can we leverage this data? And I think that's exciting, but and the part that I really enjoy when I take customers on this journey, if I'm very honest, is seeing the realization and having that understanding of how we do more with the information we've already had, and how we can actually change our practices to be improving as a business. Because at the end of the day, technology data is just once and naught. It is just legacy. It's not exciting. It's necessarily evil, but it's a bit like my electricity that I say to some people. I want to turn it on and off, and I want to use it and pay for what I use. I don't really care how it gets here. I know there's people that's very smart and much smarter than me that makes it work, but I just want to use it, and I just want to be able to make decisions with information that's current and that I've got at hand and that I know is valuable. And that's probably the most exciting part, is seeing how businesses are leveraging more of this data on an ongoing basis and transforming their businesses. That's really the bit that I see that is really excited me. And you touched on AI. There's more and more of these engines that's come available. Some of it's been built into like the Microsoft offering, where you can upload documents, train it to help you with your classifiers. So they are getting smarter. AI will be leveraged, but it's helping the business understand, how do we actually leverage that data? Because I think that's been the part that's been missing, is the visibility, and then how do we actually leverage it?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. James, I'll come to you on the visibility bit. I know we've touched on this a little bit here, but you must think, you can think of any size organization, certainly sort of mid to larger type organizations such as Chris's as well. There must be data that is existing within that organization that is that the centralized IT have no visibility of, and that's a problem when you talk about PII as well in that. How do organizations get visibility of that data? How do they get that message through to staff to ensure that they're following an appropriate line?
Yeah, and it's a really complex question, which probably has two parts. For my sins, I've been a marketer all my career, pretty much, and the number of times when I've been working for big companies that I've sat around meeting room tables where people have said, because basically marketers are starved of insight to do their jobs. They're starved of insight as to how customers behave, what people's perceptions are, and the data on which to make decisions. So to the point that Adrian makes, that the exciting thing is taking the knowledge that the organization has, in its ownership, and actually making that available to business users. So not the IT department necessarily, but marketing or whichever other department within the organization. That's really the holy grail. To do it, obviously, organizations have to gain better visibility of their data, which means when they're going to go dipping into their legacy data to migrate it into front of house, if you like, they need to understand what that information is, and ultimately they do need to classify it, organize it, make it available to employees so that they can do their job. And what we're seeing is that business owners, business users who wouldn't consider themselves technical in any way, we need to find a way to get that information in front of business users within the organization so that they can use it to drive value. So it's a cross-company data ownership challenge that I think we're only scratching the surface of. Visibility is the first thing, then organizing and protecting the information, of course. And then the question is, how do you get your high value, functionally expert individuals within your company in a position where they can leverage that data for the company's benefit? I think it's going to take 5 to 10 years, if I'm truly honest about it. It's going to be an amazing journey.
Thanks, James. Chris, how do you manage the visibility issue within your organization? Is there a way you can instill that as a principle, as a culture?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. And I don't really understand. I don't know if any of us actually understand the challenge, really, even though that James has articulated it. We will have people who save stuff on their C drives, or used to, and then we lock their C drives down. So everything's saved on their home drive or on our file server. So we try and limit the problem more than address the problem that so try to solve the problem that's source rather than provide a cure for one. So for me, it's a real problem. It's a real difficult problem to frame, I think.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I guess your thing is, what you're saying is you're going to police it in terms of put parameters around it of what they can and can't do technically, physically. Right, but I guess, are you doing an education process at the same time? Have you done that with your staff?
Yeah. There are lots and lots of education programs around security and what you should and should not do with your data, and how you should treat it. Specifically around dark areas of hidden old PCs. Well, probably not.
Yeah. Okay. Adrian, just to come to you on this one, if I may. I know this is more of an area of, another area of expertise for you. You have a number of them. But when it comes to unstructured productivity data, we kind of alluded to this earlier. I think James was talking about unstructured data as well. A lot of organizations are leveraging Microsoft 365. What direction are your customers taking as far as leveraging 365, and can it help with the data challenges and the migration challenges, particularly, that we're talking about here?
Yeah, we are finding that more customers are adopting the whole Microsoft first approach, as I'd like to call it, and leveraging the tools. And Microsoft are constantly evolving their services and their visibility. Obviously, most of that is now, if you put it into our cloud, put it into Azure, put it into Office 365, you get access to all these tools and promise you the Holy Grail. But what we are finding is organizations look at the amount of data that they have, the type of data they have, and their first thought is, well, one, it's going to be quite expensive to move it. Two, we don't quite know how to lift and shift. That was one of the terms earlier used. And what we normally find at the moment is say to customers, the last thing you want to do is just pick it all up and stick it into Office 365 or into SharePoint or into email. Is probably the easier one because you can actually lift and shift that almost effectively. But everything else, you need to start thinking about, what data do we have? How much of that is duplicate? Do we really need to migrate that? And then once you've deduped it, delete it, get rid of everything that you don't really need, what's remaining then is you can then decide, how am I going to manage or process and store that data, how am I going to make it available, which was a point that was touched on by James. And it is then understanding how we're going to classify the data. And yes, Microsoft got tools to help you as you put the data into SharePoint, for example. It can classify it, it can set retention labels for you. But what we are finding actually is the technical part of that is quite the easy bit, if I'm very honest. You configure it, you set it up. It's getting the business to agree on what the data should be, what the retention policies should be, what's a legal obligations, what's the contractual obligations we've got, because there's so many stakeholders that's involved in that process. So it's almost a business analysis process of migrating that data to Microsoft 365, because once you've mapped out your business processes, you've mapped out your user experience, you mapped out your own data retention policies, etc., then that can all be enforced and managed through your Microsoft 365. You can get all the visibility through your advanced e-discovery, for example. Chris mentioned SharePoint. The data can be understood, can be classified, can be encrypted, and we can put all the policing around it. But the big challenge is you've got to tell the system, where do you want to store the data? How do you want to bring it in? How do you want me to classify it? And that's still the part that we see as a big challenge, because half the time, as I always joke, I go into these meetings and I spend the next 5 days being the referee in a room full of people because they're all arguing. One says this is critical, the other one says no, I think it's a waste of time, and you end up being the referee between these parties, because it brings out so much passion, because you do get the answers like just in case, or what if, or just because, or I'm not comfortable. It was my predecessor that put it there. I don't want to delete it. It is, I think, you touched on that. You hover over the delete button, but nobody actually pushes down on that, can get their finger on that delete button, because then it's on their head to delete it. And I think that's still where we see it. But yes, Microsoft is there, and we're seeing more organizations adopting it, but they are still struggling with this migration bit because they don't understand what they have.
Resonates with me. I can't get my wife to throw anything away.
I was going to say,
you wanted to come in. Go ahead.
Yeah, just quickly, I was going to say, I mentioned earlier on that about AI. We were talking about AI in organization. Of course, everyone's really worried that artificial intelligence is going to take over the world. But maybe when it comes to taking decisions over data in heated meeting rooms, perhaps there is a role for AI after all to take out of humans' hands and make a proper decision without anyone putting the stoppers on it.
I love it. Okay, I'll jot that down. We'll get a case study going on that one. Right, gentlemen, look, we're nearly out of time. I would love to get each of you to give your kind of, I describe it as your summary or your takeaway, your key points, perhaps the words I've used are, if you do nothing else, do this, or think about this from a data migration and migration challenges point of view. Chris, if I could start with you first, then maybe James, and then Adrian, just to kind of put your succinct points together in the last couple of minutes.
Yeah, for me, it's about taking the right people on the project journey with you. You've got to take finance with you. You've got to take your security guys with you. You've got to take your risk and compliance guys with you. And you've certainly got to take your internal comms team with you as well. And you've got to line those guys up to start with. And those, the coming together of those 5 teams plus your technical guys are the real key to making a data migration project work.
Yeah, good summary. Thanks, Chris. James, your points.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it all starts with visibility. So gaining visibility of that information before you look to migrate it is really, really critical. You can't really lift and shift it. You're just shifting the problem. You're exposing yourself to more risk, and that's not even going to be possible if you're talking about petabytes of data in a given time frame. So visibility is really important. Understanding and identifying what's valuable, what needs to be kept, what's sensitive, etc., is really important as a prerequisite. There are tools out there that can help to do that now. But the other thing, actually, I'd pick up on Chris's point, which is it's not just technology, it's about people and process as well. So getting your team on board, understanding how your organization is going to go through this journey with you, understanding how you're going to make decisions over what should be kept, what should be moved, etc. Understanding how you're going to manage disposition of old data. It's not particularly easy to do, but if you do it right, then you can minimize the amount of data you move across and ultimately increase the probability of success for your data migration.
Yeah, thank you, James. Adrian, your takeaway.
I'm going to summarize basically what was said already. Involve the stakeholders, the business stakeholders. It's a business decision. It's not a technical decision. Technical teams is the part of the process, but more importantly as well, look at the data that you have. Remove as much of the duplicates, legacy information that's not been touched, because when you first look at it, it's a very daunting project. But actually, when you do some analysis on data, and a lot of the organization, we find that 60% of information has not been touched or has been duplicated, and a number of facts. So suddenly that the daunting challenges that you started with becomes much easier, becomes much more of a bite-sized approach, and then do look at your processes with the business and be able to communicate clearly what the benefits are. Because if you're just saying to people, we're trying to free up space, nobody will care. But if you explain to them, we're doing it to deal with compliance, we want to improve your working practices, we want to improve your day-to-day experience, you get that stakeholder buy-in, and they will come with you on the journey and help you.
Superb. Thank you, Adrian. We're out of time. I really enjoyed the conversation, really enjoyed hearing your insights. Thank you very much to each of you, Chris, James, Adrian, and I'm sure we will all catch up again soon. Everybody I know can contact you on, I think, LinkedIn, and all through the usual methods that we use these days. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye. See you. Bye.